You can't overstate the influence of Mr. Pyle, never Howard Pyle. And Mr. Pyle, of course, had his students at Drexel. He was very serious about bringing American illustration into the forefront of the American arts. He felt it was sadly neglected, and you had this tremendous surge of American publication, magazines, periodicals, books. And he understood that and felt the artists needed to be trained. So he gathered these students together at Drexel and started them from step one, just like you would learn the piano, from scale, and brought them forward, you know, from plaster cast to the model, then maybe to some landscape outdoors. Slowly, black and white only, no color, very, very determined and very serious teaching. It's sort of the classic approach to learning art. He did not put up with frivolity at all. As a matter of fact, there's a wonderful story of a class that he was teaching, and he went along and one of the students had drawn a fly on his little sketch pad. Mr. Pyle brushed it away, and of course the fly didn't move. And he was very irritated about that and sent the young student home because it was frivolity, it was not serious. And imagine how good that little drawing was. It fell full of the master. Mr. Pyle insisted that his students experience what they painted to the best of their ability. I mean, my grandfather's work runs the gamut of social, historical, romantic work. But in fact, no sooner had he heard those words from Mr. Pyle than he was off to Canada to experience and live and breathe what he would later paint.
He went up the Hudson all the way to the mouth 2 times in his life, once in 1903 and once in 1911. He was, you know, one of the first, if not the first, white man to see some of the Indians that lived up there, and had any number of stories about interactions with the Indians and also just the conditions under which he operated up there in terms of how he set up his teepee and how he kept things from freezing, how he got sunlight without having, you know, frost and mist and everything interfering with the sunlight so that he was able to paint, and just, you know, traveling by snowshoe, just all sorts of details, just this incredible stuff that, of course, none of us had ever experienced it, and he had been there. Really very amazing.
Interesting enough, he took his camera along with him, and those photographs are a body of his work that we haven't even really had a chance to archive completely. We've been focusing on his paintings, but the paintings tell a remarkable story of a real journey into a very untraveled land.
I think he had some instruction to know the things that he painted and experience them firsthand, but I think it was also in his nature. There were so many facets to his personality, and I think his love of the outdoors was something he had his whole life and was ingrained in him even before he actually studied under Howard Pyle. So I think he would have done some of that on his own, because he took other trips as well. He went to Europe once, he went out to Montana, he went down to the bayou, and he went to Cuba. So did a lot of traveling.
Many years ago, my grandmother and grandfather met, and they were engaged to be married, and they were married in 1911. And the interesting thing about that is where they spent their honeymoon. My grandfather loved to paint. He had an agenda. His agenda was to go to Louisiana, so that's where the honeymoon occurred. They went down there. He did his all of his sketches for a story he was going to write called In the Haunts of John Lafitte, who of course was a very famous pirate who lived in the bayous and waterways down there in Louisiana. Now, what did my grandmother do? She was sent to the library to do the research for the book. So she did. She was a most supportive person. She was a dear, sweet woman. In fact, she was an artist. I have one of her watercolors, but she said when she married my grandfather, she had no intention of being any competition in the field of art with him, so she no longer painted.